My question as a philosopher is, partly from studying business, economy, entrepreneurship in particular, is what if we generalize that theme of being an entrepreneur to one's entire life? And that is a perspective that contrasts a way of thinking about one's life to many traditional philosophies of life. That somehow there's a right way to do things that is set more or less in stone. You come into the world and you have certain preset obligations and a place in the world, and you are to fulfill your role, and other people then will give you approval. Now, many values can be acquired and a decent life can be lived that way, but it's not an entrepreneurial way of living. And this idea of being an entrepreneur, even in a business context, is a relatively new concept in human history, and one that I think is accelerating. Now, with that by way of a preamble, let's, as philosophers always do, go to some data, right? I want to say this is, for anyone interested in the human flourishing, human well-being, perhaps the most important chart to be aware of and to reflect upon, figuring out why this happened. And let's analyze the chart just for a moment. So along the bottom, we have time, and we're going back essentially 2,000 years of human history. And what we are measuring is GDP, which is a crude measure of how productive people are in the economy. And since you can only consume what you have produced, production is prior, and so it's an important measure of human well-being overall. So how much stuff have people made at various times in human history? And what we can see is, at least on this scale, human beings for the last 2,000 years almost have been desperately poor by modern standards. Now we know that this is reflected in life expectancy measures. People don't live long lives, right? And even when they are living, they are subject to all sorts of diseases and travails, and life is difficult. And in many cases, it's too difficult, and so people die at alarmingly high rates, and that has been the human norm. Now, this is only 2,000 years of human history, and when we talk to the anthropologists, it's maybe 1% of human history. So if we were to extend this back another 2,000 years, people are still very poor. Another 2,000 years, so we try to wrap the chart all the way around the room. We get to maybe 16,000 years ago. Right? It's basically the same story. And then we go even further back, and people are poorer, right? Prior to industrial or agricultural discovery, prior to metallurgy, for another 180,000 or more years, whatever the latest number is from the anthropologists studying human beings. So along human history, until right around here, and then suddenly human productivity skyrockets, just goes up enormously, right? Exponential, right? Now, if we care about human beings living well, living long, and we have data now that shows us that something spectacular has happened in the world in the last, this would be 250 years or so ago. Why did this happen? Now, we can start to tell a lot of stories, because the answer to that question, I think, is complicated. But we start noticing things, or noting rather, things that we know occurred roughly 500 years ago. We start to say, well, this was the Renaissance. And so people start thinking about humanism, they start to think about art differently. There are various religious revolutions, the Reformation, Columbus crosses the ocean and comes back successfully, and we start to think about the world differently. And within a century, the world starts to change. On this scale, it's hard to see, but that line actually increases by about 20%. And a 20% raise in my income, I would like that, and I'm sure most of us would like. That's a significant increase. And then it's up another 20%, right? And then another 20%. Now we're getting into the 1700s, And we start to notice that things like science, as we understand it in the modern world, has come online, has matured. We have very sophisticated mathematics happen. We have people like Isaac Newton putting together scientific programs. Science, chemistry, the beginnings of biology are a real going concern right now. We start to see right around here the idea of religious toleration, that we are going to have multiple perspectives on religion, that religion should be a more individualized, consult your conscience experiment. And we're going to have to tolerate the fact that people are going to have different views on religion. And so we're going to get politics out of religion and hopefully religion out of politics. And this idea starts to take hold right in around here. We started to see the breakdown of feudalism and the idea that there shouldn't be economic classes and then what you're going to do with your life. You're born into a certain station in life, and if your dad did this or your mom did that, that's what you are going to do. The idea of being a free agent economically starts to take hold right around that time. More spectacularly, we're aware American Revolution, French Revolution, less spectacularly, England's Glorious Revolution, dramatic transformations into modern democratic republican kinds of political systems, some of them more peaceful, some of them more violent, but nonetheless, there had, of course, been some democratic republican experiments in the ancient world, but this idea takes hold, takes deep hold, and starts to transform the world. Again, a couple of hundred years ago now. For the first time in human history, the idea that women should get an education, should be able to take charge of their own religious lives, should maybe be able to own property in their own name, to start businesses, et cetera, we start to see, again, right around here, the idea of what we now call modern feminism. Now, there's a dozen major versions of feminism, but taking seriously the idea of women's freedom and equality as a modern phenomenon. With respect to slavery, again, for the first time in human history, and it's shocking to us now to think that prior to this time right here, in many parts of the world, more than 70% of the population would be slaves, or something close to slaves, serfs, right, indentured servants with very harsh conditions and so on. The idea that there's something wrong with the institution of slavery and we should do something about it. The formation of societies, organizations that are going to take seriously getting rid of slavery and doing something about it. So the point of it is that something spectacular series of revolutions are occurring in historically an unbelievably short period of time, 1 or 2 centuries. And when we think of 2,000 years, 20,000 years, 200,000 years, that is a blink of an eye in human historical time. And we're doing revolutions in religion, in our understanding of our place in the world, in our economy, in our relations between men and women, in relations between all of us, getting rid of slavery. What's our political system going to be? Science. And of course, I haven't even said anything about the Industrial Revolution, which notedly is taking off exactly around here at the same time. We live in the most revolutionary half-millennium of human history. Now, we've been extraordinarily more productive, and we might say in various ways all of the things that I've been talking about have enabled us to be more productive. And one question then as well is who's doing all of the producing and who's getting the fruits of all of the producing? So it's not simply that there's a huge amount of stuff now being produced and one tiny % of the population gets it. It is that most people are participating in the process and receiving much higher rewards than they would have for their labor in human history. So this is poverty rates. This is only basically my lifetime and a bit. But if we think, when I was a kid, still around the world, over 25% of the world lived in extreme poverty. and that number is now down below 5%. You'll notice this is 20 years old. That number has trickled down. If you were to extend this number back in history, then by our current standard, if you hold the definition of what poverty is consistent, probably 98% of the world would be living in extreme poverty for most of human history. We've basically solved the problem of poverty by historical standards. Now that's a revolution. I want to suggest that this concept of being entrepreneurial captures a lot of it. We need to be entrepreneurial not only in our business lives, but in our religious lives. I'm going to be the decider and the explorer and the actor with respect to my religion, with respect to my economic lives, my political lives, my friendships, my musical taste, everything. I'm going to be entrepreneurial. That's the theme that I'm going for. And we have seen, if we focus ourselves just on issues of business and economics, again, for the first time, it's not that people have never started businesses before, but the number of businesses that are started by the number of people, and perhaps more importantly, the respect for people who say, I am going to go into business, I'm going to be very productive, and I hope I make a lot of money, and then live my dream. That is, again, a new phenomenon in human history. That celebration and respect for the entrepreneur. And so as that has occurred in the modern world, we have seen increased amounts of entrepreneurial activity in that narrower sense. Now what I want to suggest though is that right now, if we come to 2025, we are at another inflection point. And those of you who study technology and related social trends know that we can talk about how revolutionary things have been in technology. In some way, the Industrial Revolution is continuing, but it's continuing in an exponential form. The available energy from just having basically wood and animal power to untapping the power of coal, and the power of oil, then the power of nuclear, solar, wind, and so forth, the amount of power we have available. If we look at communications power, right, computing power, again, we start to see these curves. The same thing is occurring in the entrepreneurial space. So I've got one quotation here from a few years ago now, but from a Harvard business professor about entrepreneurial aspirations among young people and where people actually work, again, to indicate these revolutionary times. So it used to be you were born, and what you're basically going to do with your life in feudal or tribal times was more or less set. You're a little boy, you do boy things. You're a little girl, you do girl things. You're born into this class or this religion. Here's your friendship circle, here's your marriage circle, here's your life mapped out for you. All of that starts to get exploded in the modern world, and you're on your own, and you can do whatever you want in all areas of your life. So those who are economically ambitious then say, well, I'm going to start my own business. And sometimes it's, I want to do that, and sometimes they are pushed because of their circumstances to have to think creatively and start their own businesses. Nonetheless, we have a large amount of entrepreneurial activity. Now, Fortune 500 companies, I just want to say before I read the quotation what that is. There's a famous business magazine called Fortune. Every year they publish all sorts of business statistics around the world. They publish lists of the biggest companies in the world, the biggest companies in the United States, especially since the United States is the largest economy and Fortune is an American publication. So here's the context. 1960s, so back when I was a kid. 1 out of every 4 persons in the United States worked for a Fortune 500 company. Today, only 1 out of every 14 people works for these companies. Now, he's reflecting on a generational shift. You go from 1960 to the early 2000s. That number has already declined. This is in the United States, which has the world's largest share of the biggest companies in the world, where there's the most freedom and entrepreneurship celebrated, and it's accelerating even in the United States. And Carrying on, employment at Fortune 500 companies peaked at 16.5 million people in 1979 and has steadily declined every year to approximately 10.5 million people today. So if you take one idea of employment, which is to say, I am going to go to work for an established business that has an established way of doing things, and I'm going to get a job there, and they'll tell me what I'm going to do, and I will map out my career, and after a certain number of years, I will retire. Okay, no, that's fine, perfectly good career path, but that is less and less the economic reality in the United States, right? And by extension, companies or countries around the world that are doing things more the American way. Now, if people are not working in these huge companies, there still are obviously a lot of people working in the large companies, but relatively fewer, where are they working? They're working in smaller companies. They're working in companies that are entrepreneurial ventures or closer to their entrepreneurial roots. That is the business reality on the ground. Now, small print, I hope your eyes are good at the back. Another way of looking at it is to say, even if we focus on the large companies, right, the companies that are the largest companies are not the same companies across generation. There's a lot of entrepreneurial churn at the top. Now I'm going to read this. So this is the year 2000. I'm assuming that's around when most of you were born. Here are the top 10 companies in the United States, giant corporations. Number 1, General Motors, right, making cars, Walmart stores, Exxon, oil and gas, Ford, another car company, General Electric appliances, IBM, that's an instructive one there. Citigroup, also finance, AT&T, Philip Morris, that's tobacco, and the Boeing Company, airplanes. Biggest companies in the world in the year 2000. Now, interestingly, when I was in college, if you were to go back to 1980, right, how many of these top 10 companies were top 10 companies in 1980? You can look it up, right? Less than half. 1960, it's not the same companies. Some are still there, but again, it's less than half. So more relevant to you is, we jump now to year 2020, what has happened at the top over the course of 20 years? And we have the top 10, Walmart, Amazon, Apple, CVS Health, United Health Group, Berkshire Hathaway, McKesson, AmerisourceBergen, Alphabet, and ExxonMobil. Now, just flying over this data quickly, how many companies from the year 2000 are still on the list 20 years later? 2. 8 out of the 10 have dropped out. They've been replaced by new companies. And if you look at the companies that have replaced them, Amazon barely existed in the year 2000. Right? Apple had been around for a while. This is Alphabet. This is the parent company for Google. So the Google guys, right, just getting started, right, around the year 2000. So the point of this is to say, not only are fewer people working for the biggest companies themselves are subject to revolutionary change over the course of each generation. And so what happens is that even if you are working for a relatively large company, chances are very good that that company is very close to its entrepreneurial roots and is looking for a certain kind of person to come to work for it, right? Or, of course, more culturally speaking, we're asking the question, what kind of people are going to be making the companies that will be at the top of the list in another 20 years? So here's my question. I'm a parent, right? I'm an educator, and I still think of myself as relatively young, but the year 2040 is not yet written. So if we look at this trend line, though, what will the top 10 companies in the world look like in the year 2040? And the idea, or the answer to that question is, nobody has any idea, right? I have no idea what those companies are going to be. But as we read all of our indicators and follow the social media, we hear a lot of talk about another inflection point, right, that's going on in various parts of the economy, in the sense that there's all kinds of entrepreneurial activity, all kinds of new things that are happening in sciences and technologies and other aspects of culture, and things are going to change. So we can make a rough prediction. We can just extrapolate from Every 20 years in the Fortune 500, there's significant turnover, that the companies that are going to be at the top in the year 2040, some of these companies might still be there, but some of them are not going to be there. And if we are interested in preparing ourselves for the next 15 or 20 years of our careers, if we are young parents and we are having children and we're thinking, how do I prepare my kids by the time they are in the year 2040, 2045, 2050, ready to be functional in that economic business environment? What kind of a parent do I need to be, and how do I need to raise my kids? And if more broadly speaking, we're professional teachers or professional intellectuals, how do we do this? I think of it a little bit as crystal ball gazing, trying to see into the future. And that is the challenge. Now, the new inflection points, these are robots. Robotics is in some way an old story, especially after the Industrial Revolution. Those are all just robots, new generations of robots. But there is nonetheless a new inflection point. This is an automobile factory. It could be Volkswagen, it could be Ford, it could be any of them. But 20 years ago, this assembly line would have, in a picture like this, 50 or 60 people doing various things. All of those people are gone, and now we have a handful of robots. That's a transformation entirely in the blue-collar sector, people who work primarily with their hands. This is just one thing. This is industry-wide. So if I am interested in blue-collar work, my question might then be, how can I compete with the robots? And that's a deep question for me. Now, I might see the robots as a threat to me, right? In which case, my reaction needs to be more dramatic, my self-transformation. Or I might say, the robots actually are allies. How can I use the robots in what I'm interested in doing to advance my career? And that's the people who do that successfully are going to be the ones in 2040 that are doing very well. On the white-collar side of the thing, artificial intelligence, we all now are exploring what is going on here. And again, impressive technical achievements, and it's going to dramatically transform the entire white-collar sector of work. Right? People who are translators. A generation ago, we needed lots and lots of translators to do international business and all sorts of other things. Will we need any of those people in 20 years? Transcriptionists, every surgical procedure, every law case that's going on, every word the surgeon says, every word the lawyer says is transcribed, and we used to have armies of people who would type up all of the notes. We don't need those people anymore. People who are going to do sorting of insurance claims and basic research on legal cases. I'm a lawyer at a big firm, I've got a big case. I assign 25 paralegals to research all of the precedents and give me a summary of them. Am I going to need 25 paralegals when I can use ChatGPT or Grok or whatever? No, I'm not. So that's going to be another transformation. So again, we are at a technological inflection point, but the reaction is going to be shaped by those who recognize it and know how to take advantage of it. And that's going to be reflected in what happens in the year 2024. So I do philosophy of education, I do philosophy, and I like to follow entrepreneurial trends. This is the question I've been thinking about for the last couple of years. So we have young kids who are being born right now, and they're going to be entering the workforce as they're starting school 5 years from now, and then entering the workforce in the 2040s. Part of what we want to do when we're educating young people is get them ready for their work life. It's going to be a huge part of their life. It used to be, when we were parents or educators, that we knew the range of careers and the jobs that were going to be open to them, what kind of work they're going to be prepared for. 500 years ago, I didn't really need to think about it very much. Everything was by and large mapped out. 100 years ago, I'd have to think about it because there's thousands of jobs for my kids and also for young girls, as well as we open up all of those professions as well. And that was a new challenge. But still, the rate of technological and social change, while it was fast, was manageable. And I think part of the inflection point we're dealing with right now is that, say, by the time my kids get out of school, your kids get out of school, my kids are actually out of school now, but by the time your kids get out of school, what companies will they be going to work for? What kinds of jobs will they be doing? In a sense, 1 century ago, we did not know that we needed airline pilots and computer programs and film editors, right? And all of those fun, new, interesting jobs of the 20th century. What will be the new functions that need to be done in 15 or 20? I don't know. But that question has to be answered. And if I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm still going to raise my kids and teach my kids, or hopefully even more strongly than that, I can get my kids to start thinking about this problem. What do I need to do with myself to be able to enter into the workforce when I grow up? That's, again, a new entrepreneurial, stressing kind of question. How do we do that? I want to give one suggestion of an answer to that, and then I'm going to get more philosophical and say why I think objectivism as a philosophy is almost uniquely positioned to help us navigate this new environment. So here's some more data. This is now about 10 years old. But what the surveyors did was they went to senior HR people, people who hired a lot of people at a high level for jobs working in various corporations, some of them highly entrepreneurial organizations. So one way they would do this is every spring when all the universities in the United States and Canada, there's the graduating students, they go to the campuses and they interview a lot of students and they try to hire the best ones that they possibly can. So the question of the survey was, what are you looking for in the about-to-be graduates, the people you want to come to work for your company? And these were senior people who hired a lot of people and had it worked out. And of course, you want your employees to be everything, so there's a very long list of desirable traits that you want your employees to be able to do. So you generate this huge list of desirable traits, and all of these things are going to be on the list. New technology, professional media literacy, tech skills, critical thinking, oral communication, you can work with people of diverse backgrounds, and so on and so on and so on. Okay, so we want everybody to be able to do everything very well. Now we ask a follow-up question, which is, of all the things on this list, they're all good things, which ones are more important and which ones are less important? So we go for the sorting. And then we put all of that in a data table, which is this one here, the horizontal axis. So what that showed is that according to the people who are doing serious hiring, media literacy, nice but not that important. And partly the assumption is that people can do that, right? So you don't really have to pay much attention to that. New tech proficiency, right? Most young people, right? They're not like old people who are a little resistant, right? They embrace the new technology and they play around with it. What can we do? So nice, but not that important. Then we start to get into everything over here. These are the really important things that we're looking for. Another follow-up question was, when you are interviewing hundreds and thousands of people, how easy is it to find people who have those highly desirable traits? And that's the vertical axis over here. Not very difficult to find this here, not difficult here. Finding people who can write clearly and compellingly, that's difficult. People with tech skills, a little more difficult. Science, technology, engineering, math skills, man, hard to find those people. Right? Quantitative ability, basically people who are seriously proficient with math. You find one of those people, right? You get them, you love them, right? But very rare to find those people. So then we map those onto a 2x2 chart. What's really essential and what's difficult to find. And this upper right quadrant gives us that. Absolutely essential that people know how to think critically and they know how to solve problems. That's really, really important, and it's hard for us to find people who can do that, even among university graduates. So as a hypothesis, if our question is, what kinds of work, value-adding work, is going to be able to compete with robots, is going to be able to compete with artificial intelligence, is going to be a uniquely human contribution to business productivity. And if you're a young person, that if you have these skills, you will have an amazing competitive advantage to a vast majority of your peers who don't have those skills or have them to a lesser extent. Well, the answer then is to say, if you know how to think critically and solve problems, that's your best opportunity. Now, to come back to my organizing theme for this talk, which is the theme of entrepreneurism, that is classically the value added of entrepreneurs. Here's a problem. I'm willing to think critically about it. Try 3 or 4 new ideas and subject them to experimental tests and see which ones really work and which ones really don't. And be able, even though I came up with the idea, to say, I don't think this is a good idea, I'm not going to do this anymore, I'm going to go through that whole process again of trying a new idea and seeing if that one really works. And to come up with new ideas on a regular basis that I'm going to subject to the test. And to have problems that no one has either thought about or been able to solve before, but I'm going to come up with a solution for those problems and put myself into it, put my resources into it, and start a new business to try to solve that problem. That is the textbook definition of what entrepreneurs do and what people outside of the business context, people who are entrepreneurial in their lives, do. So my first hypothesis then is, for the new business landscape that we are entering into, this next generation, these are the skills that we need to prioritize in ourselves and in people that we are raising or helping to raise. I think that's a helpful start. Right? So I'll use an example of my mother, for example. 50 years ago, maybe a little longer than that, she's in her middle 80s now. But when she was going to school, and in her generation it was, you are a young lady, you will graduate high school. This is the new aspiration. You will get through high school. And you will be then an educated, modern young woman able to handle the challenges of this modern, exciting work environment. But what you really need to learn is typing. And she had entire classes through her career of typing proficiency. This is the ticket to success in the modern world. A generation ago, what were we telling young people? Go to college and learn programming. Everybody needs to learn programming. You learn programming, that is your ticket to a lifetime career of success in this innovative, modern business world. And now what we know is, of course, typing, not a skill that's really that important. And we're starting to learn fairly quickly right now programming. Right? AI can do that, so we're not going to need the programmers. So what's going to replace the typing? What's going to replace the programming? Well, if instead we are focusing our educational energies and self-development energies on these things, the young people are going to have more of a chance. Now then, of course, there's the follow-up question. What does it mean to teach critical thinking? What does it mean to teach problem solving? And that is some hard work in cognitive psychology and philosophy and linguistics and then educational practice. All that is a lot of stuff that has to be worked out. But that is then going to be a new approach to thinking about parenting and education compared to most of the philosophical schools of education that have dominated and are now institutionalized in most educational practices. Because some minority of them will say, yes, these things, but there's all sorts of other things that they will say is much more important. And the educational program is focused on those different things. So there is a more general philosophy of education battle at work here. Now, objectivism. I want to make the claim, I don't know how philosophical you are, but you know there are lots of different competing philosophies out there, competing for people's attention, competing for people's allegiances. Some of them are time-honored, have pearls of wisdom that have come down to us from the ages on which their basic reputations are based. But we have an extraordinarily diverse philosophical landscape operative right now. Plenty of new philosophies that have been developed, significantly new philosophies over the last century, in addition to the handful of serious philosophies that have come down, have stood the test of time over the course of the ages. So my hypothesis is that if you make a list of those ones, objectivism is perhaps the uniquely positioned philosophy to help us navigate the new entrepreneurial landscape. I'll give you a couple of suggestions why that is. If I can go back, is this the one that goes back? Or is it, no, that's the one that goes back. If I say this is the pair of traits that are most fundamental, of all of the philosophies that are out there and operative right now, how many prize human cognitive achievement, human cognitive skill building, celebrate entrepreneurs and the cognitive set that goes into being able to use your mind to face the world as it really is, to figure out the way it works, internalize that into your life, and act in the world on the basis of that. Now we know objectivism celebrates the capacity of reason and makes rationality fundamental to our understanding of what it is to be a human being. And that's not just an abstract label to say, develop your rational capacity. And what is your rational capacity? It's to be able to use your senses to gather as much data as you possibly can, try sorting it in various ways, figuring out which categorization schemes actually fit the way the world works. And since the cause and effect structure of the world is quite complicated, to be able to enter into that proto-scientific experimental method and perhaps even become officially a scientist or an engineer yourself. Very few philosophies are pro-reason, and only one is as pro-reason and celebratory as objectivism is. So this then is to say objectivism's epistemology, from which we get the concept of objectivity, from which the philosophy is named, is making a very fundamental statement about what it is to be a human being. And if that philosophical statement is correct, then the things that follow from it are going to be illuminating. But it also then means that all of the competitor philosophies, there are lots of them, that say reason is weak, right? Or reason is bad because it undermines human authenticity. And instead of being rational and objective and becoming a critical thinking, problem-solving person, you should be faithful, you should be traditional, you should listen to your answers at a very fundamental level. Those philosophies are not preparing human beings for this. And they're going to devote their child-rearing energies in a very different direction and thereby under-prepare their kids for the new world. Now that's a cognitive point, right, about the importance of epistemology and all of the related cognitive science fields. Because what this tells us is most of the work is cognitive work. That's the human value added. And so having the right philosophical understanding of cognition is going to be fundamental to any philosophy that's going to be successful. Now I want to turn not only to the cognition, but to the ethical issues. And again, argue that objectivism is largely unique, and in some cases specifically unique in its moral philosophy. And this issue about how to live a successful life, which is the applied moral philosophy question that's been guiding us, and one of the answers has been, well, be entrepreneurial, and we've been able to live longer and live better because we've been more entrepreneurial. That's already a value-charged way of thinking about recent human history. And in addition to all of the other revolutions, scientific revolution, industrial revolution, political revolutions, we are living through an revolution in moral philosophy, revolution in ethical philosophy. And one of the things we do know is that lots of people, when they think about ethics, they don't know, we don't need to think about ethics. It's all been decided several thousand years ago, and we just follow the rules as they have come down. That right from the beginning is going to be a moral, philosophical approach to life that sets people up for failure. Because just as we need to be innovative in lots of other areas of life, we need to be innovative in our moral thinking, and that's some of the stuff that we're grappling with over the course of the last century. But let's think about the entrepreneur again, and then I'll make some connections to Objectivism's moral philosophy in particular. So just suppose we think from a business person's way of thinking or analysis of what is it to be an entrepreneur. We say, well, where does it begin? It starts with someone who has an idea, a new idea, hopefully a creative idea. Usually it's someone who has immersed himself or herself in some field and been really playful with it and come up with a new idea. So it starts with a new idea, and that's a kind of creative knowledge. But we don't just live in our heads. The person can't just say, oh, that's an interesting idea, and then set it aside. It has to be that the person who has this idea is an ambitious person. I want to make my life better, and I want to see something happen with this idea. So it has to be the kind of person who will get up off the couch, so to speak, and go do something with the idea. But you're aware, anytime you're trying something new, that you're possibly going to fail. If you studied entrepreneurship, you know 19 out of 20 ideas sound fun for the first hour, but they turn out to be garbage. Right? And 9 out of 10 attempts at doing various things fail the first several times around. So you're well aware that you're going to fail a lot. Right? And that means you're going to self-doubt along the way. And you have a new idea, so people are going to laugh at you, and some of them want you to fail. So it takes guts to try something new and do something new. This is the getting off the couch part. You have to take initiative, even if you are afraid, even if you are worried. You have to stick with it. Most new ideas take 6 months, a year, 2 years to develop or more. You have to do a lot of experimenting, and you have to take the data, the results of your experiment seriously, adjust your idea, sometimes get rid of it altogether, throw it out. Then, when you think you are on the right track, you've got your prototype sort of worked out, there almost always is a stage where you just have to put your head down and grunt it out. I'm going to get this done. As a professor, I always think of in terms of semesters. Right? The semester is fun for the first 8 weeks, right? And then it becomes hard for the next 4 weeks, but then the last 4 weeks, you just want it to be over. But you have to nonetheless put your blindfolds on, get through at a high level. Commitment to productivity. Leadership is built into being an entrepreneur. If you're doing something new, you have to convince people who are going to pay for it that it's actually valuable to them. So you have to show them, and that's a kind of leadership. To the extent that your business is successful, you start hiring other people. You, by definition, have to be the leader. Show them what you're doing, why it matters, how to do it, and get them up to speed. The entrepreneur trades, you put your product out there, hopefully people buy it from you, you get money, they also like you, they give you esteem, they give you praise, so there's rewards, but at the same time you're well aware that you are adding value to their life. I made this cool new thing, and look at that, people are actually using it. That's amazing. And then you get the rewards of success and flourishing. Now, this is a businessy description of what it is to be in entrepreneurship from start to finish. Aspirational. Put it in a list. These are all the traits. Now, we're all nerds, so we put it in a table. And these are all the success traits. You want to be a really good entrepreneur, these are all the things you need to be good at. What does this have to do with philosophy? particularly moral philosophy. Well, what is knowledge and creativity? Where do those things come from? And this is Objectivism's commitment to rationality. What makes it possible for you to know the way the world is, and then having some acquired knowledge to be able to think creatively about it. That's a fully developed capacity for rationality. What is it to be ambitious? Well, Rand describes pride as moral ambitiousness. I want to be the best person I can be in my life and to live the best life I possibly can. The sky is the limit for me. That's what I want. Initiative. I'm making a connection to integrity. Integrity, at the root, is to say to integrate. A person who lacks initiative, to put it negatively, well, it would be nice if, right? But then the person never actually follows through on it. Right? Or it's a nice idea, but there's no action commitment that follows from it. So initiative requires integrity. It isn't. What I think is good, I'm going to act on the basis of that. I'm going to try to bring this idea into practice, whatever that idea is. And that commitment to integrating what you think is good with what you actually do in your life is the virtue of integrity. Guts, philosophers, we just call that courage. Right? You're aware of failure, but you don't let the failure possibility stop you. You do it despite the risk of failure. Perseverance. I want to make a connection to independence here. Because the opposite of perseverance is giving up. Sometimes, of course, it's appropriate to give up. Right? But it's more important, you think the idea is a good idea and you're making progress, to stick with it through all of the obstacles. That is to say, the obstacles are not going to stop me the way they stop, unfortunately, so many other people. I am independent of that. Now, one kind of independence is going to be, I'm doing something, I think it's new, I think it's important, but I've got people in my social circle who are naysayers, or they are negative. That's never going to work. You're an idiot even for trying that. My opinion of what I am doing is independent of their opinion. I'm aware of their opinion, but it is not what drives my action. I'm not dependent upon their judgment and their approval for my decisions about what I'm going to do. So independence, that's just a social part of independence, absolutely important. Experience-based adjustments. I'm going to say that's a multisyllabic way of saying you have to be honest, ruthlessly honest. I have an idea, and one of the things we know about our psychology is if you have an idea, you're partly invested in it. You want that idea to be true, right? And I do this on a regular basis. I come up with an idea. Ooh, I like that idea, right? And in many cases, it's hard then to say, after I think about it more, you know, even though I came up with that idea and I like it and I would kind of like it to be true, it isn't actually true because it doesn't fit these facts. It doesn't fit these data. And I have to recognize the facts, the data for what they are. And that's honesty. And therefore, my nice idea is wrong. I'm going to reject it. And to be able to make that part of your mental furniture so that it becomes characteristic. Ruthless honesty, and that means you have to adjust your ideas to the facts of reality as they become more complete on an ongoing basis. Productivity, well, we know there are people who are committed to being productive in the world, and people who are committed to not being productive in the world, being lazy, being parasitical, and variations on all of that. Right? I don't know what the abstract noun for leadership would be, so that's not a real word, but I'm just putting it there because I'm a philosophy guy, and everything has to be an abstract noun eventually. Right? So whatever the traits are that go into leadership, right, to be successful in life, sometimes you are a follower, sometimes you're a co-worker, sometimes you're a leader. And you have to be the leader in your own life for sure. So figuring out what goes into being a leader. Trading value for value, strong connection to justice. I'm not a thief. I'm not a parasite. I don't tolerate also people who want to be parasitical on me. Right? I want to create value in the world. I want to be recognized for the value that I create in the world. And that's a psychological reward for being a value creator, but I also want the material rewards. And at the same time, you are getting the rewards from my productivity. It's a trade. Right? And that's connected. And finally, the capacity for experiencing success, enjoying success. I'm worth it. I deserve it. Right? Instead of sometimes what is known as the imposter syndrome, people who are successful and they deserve to feel good about their success, but they can't do it, or they don't know how to enjoy their success. There are skills there that need to be acquired, and that's all part of self-esteem. Now, this is a ground up from business traits that make one successful in entrepreneurship to a list of virtues. And moral philosophers, they use the concept of virtue, excellence of character integrated with action. And we have had long historical debates over what fundamentally the character traits of a moral human being should be. And every moral philosophy distills its more comprehensive understanding of the world, what it is to be a human being, typically into a short list of the most important virtues. Now, if we make the contrast, how many other moral philosophies traditionally have said the most important virtue is to be obedient, to listen to higher authority and follow the rules? Most of them. How many have said, don't expect too much from life, instead insulate yourself emotionally from the ups and downs of outrageous fortune and try to survive with internal peacefulness of soul? That's what it is to be the best person. Again, several of them. How many have said, don't think too much of yourself? You're part of a group, the group is more important. You're part of a tribe, the tribe is more important. If there's a conflict between what you want to get out of life and what is expected of you, be willing to sacrifice what you want out of life and do what is expected of you. Again, lots of them. If you look at the distilled lists of virtues, right, you start to see things like obedience, right, and knowing your place in society, right, and not rocking the boat, and so on. You're looking at a philosophy that is not supporting an entrepreneurial approach to life. Now, to flip over to the positive, for those of you who have read Rand in general, and I just ask you to look at that list on the right. I think there's 10 lines there. And then more specifically, this is for extra trivia points in the game. If you have read Rand's Virtue of Selfishness, the lead essay there is called The Objectivist Ethics. And at one point, Rand gives a list of how many core virtues in the human being. This is the audience participation point. 7. All right, you are the winner, right, of the prize. 7 top virtues. Right? And how many of those virtues are on this list? All 7 of them. They're dominated. So that is to say that Objectivism's moral philosophy, she starts from largely a philosophical perspective, but seems to be a distillation of an ethic. That is part of it. Its virtue ethic is custom tailored to being an entrepreneur in one's life. The things that are not on the list, leadership, self-esteem, at least not in that work, but of course Rand has lots of things to say about self-esteem otherwise, and courage. Right? And sometimes there's a small sub-debate within Objectivism over whether we should really add courage to the canonical list and make it 8 instead of 7 or not. Right? Okay. But the point just is, this seems to be a customized virtue ethic for entrepreneurism. And that is unique to Objectivism. Of all of the philosophies that are contenders on the philosophical scene right now. So if we're looking for a philosophy that's going to aid entrepreneurs, partly business is a matter of taking raw material and shaping it into something of greater value. Big part of what philosophy is seeing yourself as raw material, particularly when you are a young person, that I am shapeable into something that's more valuable. I need to work on not only my skill set, but my character set to become the kind of person who can succeed at life. And if Objectivism is correct, this is the set of character skills or habits we all need to work on in order to be able to succeed in life and therefore be successful in this new world. Time man, 5, thank you. So I'm going to stop there and save the final 5 minutes for questions. Let me just say, though, I am here all of today and all of tomorrow. I put a lot of stuff out there, so feel welcome to approach me at any time for further discussions. But let's take a little Q&A right now.
So if you have questions, you can. There will be mics going around. Stephen, if you want to select the questions yourself, you can.
Okay, I'll do that. I saw her hand first, so I know there was someone back there, and so I think we'll go in this direction, please.
Hi everyone, so thank you for your thought-provoking session. So actually I had 5 questions,
5?
But 2 of them you have already answered, so 3 at least remains, but I will ask the first one. So you have mentioned in your speech about success traits and moral virtues, right?
Yes.
But I just wonder, and I would love to know your opinion on this question, like can failure be useful from objectivist point of view when a person wants to be an entrepreneur in her or his life?
I missed the key word there. Can
failure be useful?
Failure.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Good. I would nest failure right in around here, probably right here. Yeah. So, but yes, absolutely. And yeah, I've got whole sections when I've worked this up for a philosophy of education on thinking about current educational systems and their attitude toward failure and how that needs to be changed. What I mean by that then is in an education context, if you think of little kids, right, when they go to school, what's the prevailing attitude toward failure? Well, I'm going to stereotype it a little bit, but you sit there, you open the book, the answers are in the book, or the teacher tells you what the answers are and you learn them, and I'm going to test you. And suddenly the kid is afraid. Right? Why would the kid be afraid of the test? Because I might fail the test. And if I fail the test, then the teacher will be upset with me. This is a terrible test, young lady. Right? And then I have to tell my mom and dad, and they're going to be angry with me. So the prevailing thing is that failure is bad, and you had better not do it. But we also then know that failure leads to risk avoidance, it leads to compliance mentality, and the opposite of all of these things. So if the opposite analysis is the right one, then we have to say, if we want people to be experimental and innovative and all of those sorts of things, we know that built into that is a hugely high failure rate. So we have to encourage people to fail, and to fail a lot, and to say things like, okay, that was a good try. Yeah, that was a good idea. What can we learn from this idea? And how can you adjust the idea, or maybe just throw it out, but that's fine. So we're starting to see signs of that certainly in entrepreneurial culture. Right? So you tried a new business and you failed. Well, that's not seen as a bad thing, right? Because the expectation is, in most entrepreneurial cultures, that you're going to try again, and that's just the price that you pay for trying to be successful. So in one sense, we need to normalize high rates of failure in life. Little sidebar, this is one of the reasons why I'm a pretty big fan of video games for preparation for life. There's a lot of discussion in education circles about video games. Are they bad and blah, blah, blah. But you just watch kids playing video games, and what happens, you start to play the game and then you fail. right? You get killed by the monster or the bad guy or whatever the obstacle is. And then you have to, so, I'm just going to give up on this game. No, you try again. And you do something a little bit different, and you fail again. Right? And then after 12 times, you level up to the next level. Right? But that's one success out of 12 times. But what you have learned, and what the video game is teaching you in a way is, this is life. For you to level up, you're going to fail a lot until you master the skills and get it right, are creative enough to get up to the next level. And I think that's a good thing. So I think much of education should be like that, just like much of life should be. So that's an excellent question. Here.
Thank you. I have a bit of a question about the varying business trends that I see. In the last 5 years after the pandemic, the US economy's dependence on the largest 10 companies has increased significantly, especially as the new people entering the business or stock market started only buying the largest companies. Now the 10 largest companies represent something like 50% of the stock market.
Yes, yes.
And which made the US economy dependent on these companies and even pushed the US government to start protectionist policies.
Yes.
And these companies are swallowing investment that would otherwise go to startups or competitors.
Yes.
What kind of a way do you see out of this trend? Because this trend really worries me because it is both killing investment and innovation.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, I think that's a very good observation and something certainly to be worried about. I'm going to step outside of my philosopher hat, right, and speak to this. But I do think there are a couple of things that can be said on that. Part of it is there have been hugely turbulent times. So COVID is one thing plus other things. And it is a natural reaction for people to become more risk averse after going through a traumatic series of events like that. And one way of avoiding risk is going with this tried and true. And so you might then say at the top 10 safe investments. So it could just be this is a reaction and perhaps an overreaction to some trauma, and eventually we will get out of that. I think it's worse than that, though it's not simply that. I think the US economy has become increasingly cartelized. Sorry? Yes, yeah, partly they've been pushing for it, but also the government has been going along. We've been following increasingly since the 1990s what then President Bill Clinton and British Prime Minister Tony Blair called the third way. So communism failed, right? So we don't want to be communists. On the other hand, we don't want to really become capitalists because they're kind of slightly left in their economy. So we're going to try to go the middle ground, but do it more strategically and see the major industries as working in partnerships in various ways with governments. And the end result of that always is the creation of favored companies and cartels, and that skews the business investment landscape in exactly the way that you are going on. And I don't think that's all of it, but that's a big question. So I do think it is worrying, and partly it's going to be, I think, a psychological correction, but I do think there's also economic philosophy and political philosophy work ahead of us on that as well. Yes.
Hello. So this presentation for sure was analyzing our objectivisms and focus more on rationality to the perspective of being in entrepreneurship. And my question is going to be about in this context currently, and especially with the new entrepreneurs. When we come to the intellectual or more associated to critical knowledge, one of the biggest issues is burnouts and other psychological issues. If you go to Silicon Valley, for instance, one of the biggest issues they had to deal with was that the biggest entrepreneurs, they came to a point that they couldn't work anymore because they were burned out. And one of my question here is, we know in terms of psychologically, burnout is not solved with reason. You cannot rationalize your emotions and overcome these kind of issues. So and that goes to the perseverance and experience-based adjustments, because that's especially what happens to people that are really critical, because they always try to solve everything by rationalizing it.
Yes.
So my question is, when you go to this point, when you have such strong capacities for these people, and you lack those people, because then also entrepreneurship, they cannot hire them because they are burnout, what do you do?
No, that's an excellent point. And I think that when we leave this high theory and go to the next question of how do we actually operationalize this, then exactly what you are talking about has to occur with each of these cells. So there needs to be a more detailed applied literature worked out that's going to include a lot of good psychology and physiology to see what it takes to make these virtues real and embodied and operationalized in people's lives. And in each case, there's going to be a too much or a too less. So we could say by analogy, oh, courage is on the list, and what that means is every time there's a challenge, I just need to go 100% in and face that challenge. And we know that people will be exercising bravado and do all kinds of stupid things, taking on things that they are not yet prepared for, and they will fail as a result of that. So with respect to productiveness, as you are pointing out, one thing that happens is people say, yeah, I want to be very productive, I'm very ambitious, and they throw themselves into something, but then they reach a burnout stage. So part of what it means to operationalize being a productive person has to involve a rational assessment of what your psychological limits are and what your physical limits are. And there's going to be some variation among individuals, but then training yourself to operationalize that in your life. So part of the problem is always going to be when you are young, you think you have unlimited energy. You don't know what your limits are. So there is going to be a trial and error issue there. And people do want to find what their limits are, and many people will go too far in exploring what their limits are. And of course, people in entrepreneurial contexts, like you're mentioning, they make commitments where they have to deliver, and they will overpromise, and then they will add stress on themselves that they can't handle, and they will be burned out as well. So the analogy I would suggest here is, and I think we're still in the early stages of this, since this is relatively new phenomenon in human history, is by analogy to athleticism. That when you are a young person, you've got this natural vitality and it seems like you have unlimited energy. But if you are going to be a serious athlete and a professional athlete, or even if you're not quite that ambitious in that area, you want to have the best physicality that you can, there is a learning process about what the limits of my body are in all of these various areas. And I have to learn. There's going to be a lot of trial and error. Because we know if I overdo it, then I'm going to damage myself physically, and I won't be able to engage at peak performance. So a lot of self-learning, and people who are very serious about it will also hire coaches who have that expertise, who will guide them through that process. So I think the natural analog to that on the psychological side will then be to say, if I am not training for the Olympics, but I am training for my $10 million venture capital commitment over the next 2 years, I'm going to be a serious entrepreneur. That just as the Olympic athlete will have a coach, the entrepreneur will hire a life coach to work with him, and that's exactly one of the issues that has to be dealt with. And I think this is also evolving, that rationality will be the solution, because figuring out what that life coach is going to teach the aspiring entrepreneur involves keeping up with what's going on in physiology, what's going on in psychology as these things are being studied more intensively and we are learning more. So I think that's a cutting edge aspect of it. Okay, I'm being instructed, we have to stop. As I said, I'm around for the next couple of days and there are more hands, so let's continue the conversation, but we'll stop there. Thanks for your attention.